and where democracy is in terms of opinions clustered in form of political organizations, then the political organizations, their lives themselves are supposed to be rights-based. Without rights, you cannot have political parties. You can have them registered. Like in Uganda, I have often told people, we have not had a chance to enjoy or to have what we call multi-party political dispensation. You see, people think the several parties that exist in Uganda in total are referred to as multipartism. It is not true. Multipartism must be a dispensation. The quality of operationalization of political organizations in terms of causing governance, that is the freedom that must exist. For you to say that Uganda is run on a principle of multipartism, we have never had. All we have had historically is each party that takes power, authoritarianism is established to the extent that all the other parties are banned from operation, either directly or indirectly, and it establishes a one-party entity. Now, the current system that we have is not even a one-party. All parties are non-existent. The leader that has existed for over 35 years has established all institutions as clusters of a task force for him to further his own leadership. So what do? It now establishes us towards one major aim and entity: transition. Simple. So what you need to know, you cannot understand this issue because it is vivisectionist in nature. It is establishing, we are tearing the old skin of political humanity and giving it a new name. These are things that have never happened in Uganda. You can only understand what Honorable Norbert Mao did by benchmarking it with what others have done in other countries. Not in Uganda. In Uganda, it has never existed. Most people that are assessing Honorable Norbert Mao, they are assessing him on account that he has become a minister. Now, you are journalists. Tell me one DP president that has never been a minister. Just one. In fact, other than Ben Chiwanuka, all have been Museveni's ministers. So for me, that one does not make any difference. And clearly, Ugandans are beginning to behave like a frog that lives in a pot and begins to think that the size of the sky is actually the size of the pot mouth. It is only when you break the pot that it recognizes that the sky is actually way bigger than it had thought. So that is what we need to know. Now, multipartism. When we went into what they referred to as operationalization of political parties, that actually failed, but at least allowed the registration of political organizations and parties. Others think that it was actually a function of a referendum. Others even think that it was a product of a court case. I think all of those did not make sense. Parties were freed under the auspices of what we call the Africa Action Plan. That was now an agreement that all African presidents in 2002 at Kananaskis promised that we are going to free parties in order to obtain grants before the G7, the G8. Grants that were highly needed. In Uganda here, we wanted to run what we call universal primary education. Now, the funds availed in 1998 were not enough when Gordon Brown, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer then of Britain, was chairing the main committee of the International Monetary Fund. They accorded what we call the highly indebted poor countries leverage that all the debts available were now going to be excused if those countries were to provide: one, universal primary education; two, freedom of political parties. Now, Uganda chose only universal primary education, and that is what we chose. Kenya in 1991 chose to free political parties. You see, to understand, these are very broad matters, very broad. But to take you back from historicity of African leadership, all African leaders never needed anything to do with the competition. When they formed the Organization of African Unity, the charter that was used to form the same had Article 3 That Article 3 established non-interference in what they called the internal matters by all the other states, to the extent that all leaders now were free to deal with their populations the way they pleased. And nobody was supposed to interfere in what they called non-internal affairs of those partner states. Now, on adoption of the Constitutive Act that formed the African Union, they now promised the donors that we are going to establish what we call rights. Now, some rights were established under the African Charter on human and people's rights. Other rights were also now to, again, now generate a court. You know the African Court on Human and People's Rights? It was under a protocol provided under that charter. But still, you cannot access that court. Why? Because under Article 36, Clause 4, that each country that can allow its citizens to sue for rights abuse in that court must deposit a declaration first. Now, Uganda has never. I even went to court. If you people go on Google, I sued the 4 partner states, Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, and Burundi, for their refusal to deposit a declaration. Before the East African Court is where I took the matter. Because I want you people to begin using that court for fundamental rights abuses. The courts in Uganda may not have the capacity really to handle human rights causes, because those are courts that are actually manned, or if you like, womaned by those appointed by abusers of human rights. Now, I'm giving you a background because I don't want to give a yes or no answer to the question, but I'm getting there. So you need the background in order to form the objective reasons that made it a logical necessity for Honorable Mao to sign a cooperation entity with the ruling government. So, there are successive stages of obtaining rights. I am getting to tell you why and how political parties were ideally freed in courts. So at Kananaski, something happened. 4 major presidents at the time, each emerged with an economic plan that is a proposal before the G8. Now the G8 were, of course, that is a conglomerate of big countries that would be to the aid of African nations if they wanted to develop. One was Obasanjo of Nigeria at the time. The other one was Thabo Mbeki of South Africa at the time. Another one was Bouteflika of Algeria at the time, and Abdoulaye Wade of Senegal at the time. So when they each came with the independent, the Europeans saw it as a multiplicity of proposals. They said, no, merge those into one. Let us term it the Africa Action Plan. We use all the provisions as qualifications that if you are to qualify for this, you must do this. So part of the ground is for qualification for grants and loans was your country must free political parties. That was in 2002. So when that one happened, they even established what they call a peer review mechanism, that you must be able to review the operationalization and application of all provisions of this Africa Action Plan yourselves. It was established. So Uganda freed the political parties not because they wanted them to operate, but only to qualify for grants. That is why President Museveni said, Tubejeko. I think you remember. So what happened was, parties were still in abeyance, but of course they allowed everybody to form a party, and you begin talking about it as if it is a political organization. Otherwise, there is no civic education, there is no operation. You don't have anything, including the funding of political organizations. Clearly, even NRM is not a political party. The members of NRM will never actually say that their president is scared because they are coming to sit in a delegates conference. It is impossible. It is actually the reverse. It is not the way it happens in South Africa, for example. If ANC is sitting, the president is worried. They can even remove him. Here in Uganda, it is actually because they say a dog, for you communicators, you know, that a dog wags its tail. But in Uganda, it is the tail wagging the dog because it is bigger than the dog itself. So even NRM is if it is a political party registered, it is also part of the political parties on the opposition. Why? Because we have had a basis of individual merit. That basis formed the government, it ran the government, it is still running government. So the individual in Uganda is sacrosanct. The individual thinks that his or her opinion is superior to the opinion of political parties. You get the point? And that is what is causing now the dichotomy between those that are actually running political parties and the followers. So you journalists, when you are making assessments, you need to first of all know that we have not yet emerged from the principle of individual merit, which was the basis of the national resistance movement before political parties were registered. Now, that movement was established under the infamous Article 269 of the Constitution then, now repealed. You get the point? Now, that meant that an individual has superior knowledge, superior capacity, superior freedoms to take decisions. Now, establishment of a political party meant that the party is supreme. The party is always right. You and I can make a mistake, but not the party. The party is more than you and I, and more than 1,000 others like you and I. That is a principle on which a political party is based. Today, what happened? DP signed a cooperation agreement. Because in Uganda, we don't have political organizations, political parties that are actually active, or even those that know what is happening. There is difference because when you establish authoritarian rule, there happens only two entities. One, the entity that believes it is a part of you or you are part of it, you the leader. And two, the entity that believes they are actually the aggrieved. That is why we can only have two candidates in an election that have substantial capacity to obtain votes. Because we are dealing with the state, agende. Then the state is dealing with us, sijagenda. So that is the dichotomy of politics in Uganda. That cannot be a basis for a transition. A transition should be based on rights given to political parties, first of all to exist or even to be formed. That is what took place now in several countries. And I want you to benchmark. Kenya, the law that was to the effect of freeing political parties was lodged before Parliament in 1991 in Kenya. By 1992, they had an election based on political parties. Now, the difference between Kenya and here is that they have got robust beliefs in their own ethnic origins, to the extent that a political leader originating from an ethnic group takes a decision on behalf of that group and they follow without question. In Uganda, we don't have that. Because for 35 years, the national resistance movement has castigated the existence of tribes and tribal decisions, telling you, in fact, that it is called sectarianism and it is bad. Tribes have vanished as a method of decision making. Now, what has happened? Two tribes have emerged. The tribe of those that have money and those that don't. What you are actually vending is the message. Now, what is the message and where is it located? Sometimes the message is not located in understanding the body of what you have written or said. There are times when actually message is the fact that you are better than some people in certain things. So I can choose to divide my own speeches in three clusters. One, I can be called eloquent. Yes, that is when you speak well and everybody understands what you are saying. You are then generally referred to as an eloquent speaker. But there are times when you want actually to exhibit some bit of professionalism, some diction, some punctuation of diction. You create a hodgepodge of some increments in terms of what people should know. Then you add in a few words. There you are choosing to be grandiloquent. Now you are not eloquent. That is now the second stage of eloquence. That is grandiloquence. But there are stages when you want actually to tell people that actually there are things that exist that you are not even aware of, but they are also called English. You speak for 10 minutes. And for people like those that watched my campaigns in Makerere University almost 20 years ago, NASA knows. I would give speeches of 10 minutes without anybody understanding what I have said. So I was a candidate that was overwhelmingly voted for because nobody knew what I was going to do. And that is Makerere University. And clearly, it is also now a matter. So there you are choosing to be magniloquent. Now that is the third stage of the English language. So all of those, you are making a communication where now message lies in the fact that there are things people should know that they don't know. In Uganda, the reading culture is still so low. And I pity journalism. That is why there is an influx, and of course we are again losing many people out of journalism. So it quickly gets to transmogrify into other businesses. Why? In Uganda, if war broke out and there is looting, the safest business to invest in that will not be looted is a bookshop. Nobody will loot it. They will say, no, there is nothing, just books. But TVs will be stolen, everything, because the reading culture here is still low, and you must grapple with that fact. That is where now you are. The competing entities are now the poor versus those that have got means. But in Kenya, the successful elections that they had were also, during that period of time, the difference between KANU, as it then was, led by Moi, Liberal Democratic Party led by Raila Odinga at the time, and of course the Democratic Party led by the late Mwai Kibaki at the time, you would see the differences. Of course, Raila Odinga, it became Liberal Democratic Party, but after Ford, and Ford becoming Ford Kenya, Ford Assyrian, you have all that history. Now, it meant that if any of the two political entities merged, the difference between what KANU used to get at 38%, Democratic Party gets 29%. Liberal Democratic Party of Raila Odinga gets 24%. It would be incumbent that if the DP merged with the LDP at the time, they would definitely defeat Moi. So in 1997, he makes a statement that he is not returning for the 2022 election. Now that meant that now they had to work out processes and procedures of transition. What happened? Raila Odinga joined the KANU. He became the Secretary General, knowing that actually he will be the candidate brought by Moi. When it became incumbent that Moi only chose Uhuru at the time, most people don't know that Uhuru failed an election before as a presidential candidate in Kenya. When he chose Uhuru, an avalanche of defectors then merged with the Democratic Party of the late Mwai Kibaki and formed the alliance, National Alliance of Kenya. Now, that is when they took power from Moi and Uhuru lost an election. How do you cause an avalanche where George Saitoti and everybody and they left KANU? It is when you go inside there and get them out. Today we don't have a political party. What we have are people that actually formed a joint government with NRM, coming from several political parties, and got stuck there. They went there without agreement. They had agreed to nothing. They just went there as people that obtained jobs to begin serving government. No agreement. It had no expiry. There was no commencement date. The man just used them as a task force to fulfill the objects for which he had captured power. To date, we have members of DP that no longer now remember their members. They have even, to date, they have become now members of NRM. What happened in Rwanda? Because I told you that each step in a country's political development is a result of definite experiences. So Uganda is in Kenya's 1997. If you want to benchmark Kenya with Uganda, you go to 1997. You don't benchmark it with current affairs. I heard people say, but you see, these people have concluded an election. There was no arrests. People were not killed. Nothing happened of the nature, no tear gas. Yes, they are in 2022, and we are in the year 1997. That is how you benchmark Kenya. What happened in Rwanda? The death and annihilation of close to 1 million people because of their own differences, the dichotomy between ethnic groups, majorly two, the Tutsi and the Hutu, led to an establishment after the revolution, 1994 revolution, of a body politic that can serve Rwanda as a transition. What happened? Today, when you look at, for example, the Constitution of Rwanda, Article 10, the Speaker of Parliament, which they call the House of Deputies, and the President cannot come from the same political party. That is by law. That is number one. Number two, a party that has got majority in Parliament cannot have 50% of cabinet ministers. That is the law in Rwanda. Why? Their problems get solved when you play around with the dichotomous existence of the two ethnic groups. And I can tell you that after an election, you cannot have walk to work in Rwanda. Everybody has duly obtained what is due to them. And they form government depending on the results of an election they have concluded. If the president gets 99% of the vote, he doesn't have 50% of cabinet. So clearly all opinions and options are implemented in the governance of a country. What happens in Burundi? The 60-40 share. That the Hutu take 60% as the majority, and the 40 take, the Tutsi take 40%. Of course, that includes the Twa and the other people. Now, that is the dichotomy that determines the manner of administration of a country. What happens in Uganda? Article 1 on sovereignty of the people says all power belongs to the people. Okay, what is power? To determine where the country must go, how many roads should be constructed, taxes, everything. But for 35 years, we have kept certain people outside the power. We have created a corridor of the powerless, which is illegal and unconstitutional. We can't kowtow to such a thing. So these are very scientific matters that cannot be understood by merely vending buzzwords. You know, in Uganda, we have relegated ourselves to buzzwords, engombo. You see? Ajagenda. You state that the man is going when you are 35 years. By the time you state it again, you are 40 and he's still there. We don't know whether he's still there because he's strong or he's still there because he's stuck. You are experimenting on the lives of the people. Each time a bad government remains, that means people must die. Those in hospitals will die because of no medicine. And for us, we are just joking about it. Today, the population, there is a low relative political maturity of the masses. Very low. The Russians had emerged with what they call the relative political maturity thermometer to measure the political maturity of their people during Soviet Union times. Today, if you have to establish what we call the relative political maturity here in Uganda, only the thermometer, it is very low. People now will elect you to perform certain activities, not because of your knowledge of such performance, but because of how you do other things well. One, they can elect you to govern a country, meaning you are going to be in charge of the central bank and begin to materially determine economic policies that will definitely now either illuminate the future course of a country or even the contrary, not because of how you know economic processes and procedures, not because of how you know governance processes and procedures, but certainly because of how you look on the poster. That is a low relative political maturity standard that cannot be able to illuminate or clear a proper transition path for a country. Therefore, what happened? The president of the Democratic Party and the Secretary General signed the cooperation agreement with the government. I say government because it doesn't matter whether you call it NRM or anything. I think all of them are fused in one. I told you there is no National Resistance Movement Party for me. What exists is a dogmatic cult with a simplified and easily graspable catechism, and with President Museveni as the high priest celebrating the mass. So that is what exists. If you want to call it a party, it's up to you. For me, I don't. So, when he signs it, you must read what they are actually signing for. One, the major reason is a transition process. There must be a transition of some sort. Not based on an election that you know you will never win. No. You don't tell lies to the population. We have never had an election. We don't have, in fact, I argued with one of very senior ranking officials. We are arguing, we had a debate in the United States before diplomats. He actually said that one of the indicators of democracy in Uganda was that we hold periodical elections. And clearly, according to him, that was democracy. When my turn to speak came, I said, what is wrong with my brother here? We don't have democracy. In fact, when he was talking, he said the problem with the opposition is that they even want power. Now, you imagine such, what is lodged at the subconscious level of the brain of NRM people is that when you are on the opposition, you must even thank God that you were there. Don't reach out to anything else. What we have in Uganda, because of the quality of what they call an election, is not an indicator of democracy. I have called it all sorts of names, and they all exist. If you want to look at them, what we have is a democradula or a dictabulanda. That's how you have to call it. The Mexicans call it the apertura democratica. If you want to understand what I mean, look at porridge in a cup. On the surface, it certainly exhibits temperatures that are not the real temperatures of the porridge in the cup. That is what we have in Uganda. So clearly we are now getting back to 1986 of Uganda. That is what we are doing, this time by agreement. We are going to sit on a table and determine the way forward for Uganda. To determine that political parties should be formed. It does not matter which names they will carry. To determine that we must have freedoms in an election. To determine that the current president can also see and support a candidate of his choice. So that all the other candidates are competing with somebody else, not him. When somebody stays at the helm for over 35 years, he himself becomes an institution of its own. All actors in all the fields that cause change in Uganda that he found there are dead. He's the oldest. All the others are dead, and all of those that exist, he either made them directly or indirectly. So you can't compete with such a person. He looks at every organ and institution as a task force for his other election if it is held. Why? As a candidate, when you're heading for an election, you want 25,000 posters, 40 youth, you have flyers, you want a campaign address, campaign system, public address system. You want this. Now for him, what he's talking about, his checklist includes, now I need the task force and 40 people. I want police. I want the army. I want the electoral commission. Everything is just a task force material for him to win an election. So the only election that can bring democracy in Uganda is the one in which he is not the candidate. How do you cause that? Agree on the several points that we formed that are part of the agreement. That's what we are talking about, civic education. Here, everybody votes, but nobody is taught what to do. That's why they vote for anybody, despite what they can do. So that is what the Democratic Party did. In terms of whether the party is behind it or not, because you asked me whether I am for it or not,